I love to know what you introduce yourselves if you could, and maybe give a little background on your company, and then we'll jump off from there.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. I'll kick things off. So my name's Joe Coveney. As you may already be aware, I work here at OTC Markets Group. I am the co-head of our EMEA franchise, so responsible for both business development and client service. It's a pleasure to have worked with all the companies that are presenting today, as well as many others from the region. And really, my team's primary roles and responsibilities are helping listed companies from Euronext, NASDAQ Nordic, Spotlight, Nordic Growth Market, et cetera, increase their visibility, tradability, and compliance to U.S. investors. So, the theme for today's conversation is really just kind of best practices for accessing the U.S. market, different sort of high-level strategies, and really appreciate the chance to share the stage with the rest of us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexander Lindquist. I work at SCB, based in our New York office. SCB is a leading Nordic investment banks. Been around since 1856. Top 100 banks in the world in terms of assets. And so my responsibility here in New York is to lead our U.S. investment banking opportunities, whether that's doing U.S. dollar bonds, raising equity in the U.S. markets, helping out with M&A and cross-border opportunities.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ken Kraszewski. I'm a counsel at Borenius. Borenius is a Finnish law firm with offices mainly in Finland, but also in New York and London. My background is in capital markets, having worked both in Europe and in the U.S. And primarily what I do now in my current role is help Finnish and other Nordic companies raise funds from the U.S. So I'm a New York qualified lawyer by training. So I, very, very happy to be here as well. And thank you to Joe for the invitation. So glad to get into this discussion.
I'm Thomas Jansson, working for NanoCap. I'm a co-founder. We do investments within startups or early stage companies. And then we have an active role as shareholders. And one main thing is to help them to go to the US market, for example. We have been doing this since 2014. So the company has been operating more than 10 years in this sector.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think all of your perspectives will be interesting on this question of when we talk about some of the advantages for Nordic issuers and coming to the U.S. markets, coming to U.S. investors. What do you see from your perspective as being some of the main advantages? Maybe Alex.
There's an enormous amount of opportunities here in the United States. Being the center of the capital markets of the world here, there's thousands of investors that are potential investors for your companies, right? And the key is realizing that diversifying your shareholder base every year, every quarter is extremely important, right? So the opportunity really is to meet future investors, learn from them, they'll learn from you, foster relationships. Too often, companies don't have enough liquidity. The share price might be at a good price, but if there's not enough liquidity, many investors will not be able to invest, right? But sometimes if you're missing one of those two things, you're kind of limiting yourself in the long term. So having as many conversations as you can and hopefully improving the trading liquidity in the stock, and just like investing, diversifying your shareholder base across geographies.
What do you see with the issuers that you bring here?
Yeah, I mean, of course, a lot of the issuers are attracted by the biggest, deepest pool of capital in the world. But I think that the ones that I see have the most success really are looking to the U.S. as a platform for growth, as a place where they can make strategic partnerships, where they have a huge either retail consumer base or just business consumer base. And they really think about the U.S. not as just some place to raise capital, but to sort of position themselves for future growth, for explosive growth. And this is kind of like a bit of a harder mindset to get across to Nordic companies. And I work primarily with Finnish companies, and from a Finnish company's point of view, the Swedish companies are really extremely outgoing. So, and the Swedish companies are maybe not thought of that way by U.S. investors. Finnish companies really need to sort of focus on the growth potential that exists in the U.S. and really kind of step out of their safe mindset.
I can agree fully on what you say and everything, but as you said, to get there, it's important to focus on the right things. You cannot just go here and think it solves itself. Yeah. You need to have a long-term plan all the time. You need to talk to investors, advisors, before you do the first step maybe, because otherwise yes, will cost money. It doesn't matter if it's a low cost or a high cost, but you need to have a long time plan for your business to grow the business. And then, of course, if you do that, the investor base is bigger than anywhere else.
Backing on that, what's your advice to some of the companies that you've worked with around an IR strategy?
First, you need to find good partners. You need to work with them long term. You cannot just jump around because the result doesn't come in the first day. And people ask like, oh, is it good to be there? No, it's not good to be here. You need to be here and work. That's how you build your success for the long term. And it doesn't matter if you're small or big. You need to do it long term. Like, get the market to understand your business.
Are the disclosure requirements any different for the Nordic companies when they come here to reach out to the U.S. investor base?
No, I mean, particularly if they're looking to trade on OTC, no, they don't necessarily have to worry about different disclosure requirements. But of course, if they're doing some kind of private offering, then yes, they need to worry about whether they're talking to accredited investors, whether they're talking to squids, and there's a whole, we don't need to get into all of it, but they should speak with legal advisors before making those contacts, of course.
Yeah, I think the beauty of kind of how we operate is the fact that we are a stock market by definition and not necessarily a stock exchange. We walk, talk, and act like a stock exchange and perform the exact same functions of connecting buyers and sellers of equities. The fact that we're a stock market, an alternative trade system, we get to use this special exemption from the SEC, Rule 12G32B, which is unique to companies who trade here on the OTC markets. And that exemption essentially says if you're public outside the U.S. on a qualified foreign exchange, all the Nordic markets have this QFE designation, you can passport your local filings and disclosures as long as they're in English to be public here. So from kind of a cost or resource perspective, for many companies listed abroad, our market is a very attractive alternative to going through perhaps a more complex or risky requirements of trading on one of the U.S. exchanges.
That's interesting. I mean, you can sort of allude to some of the differences between Finnish and Swedish companies. What sort of differences do you see between a Nordic investor base and a U.S. investor base in the argument? Maybe Alex.
Yeah, happy to take that one. So I would say the U.S. investor base, being that you're a totally different time zones, right? And if you're, you're going to have less of a patience, right? If you're not kind of locally here, right? So getting to the minimum bars of liquidity, chances are they're going to be competing on different conference calls every single day. So if you have a conference call with some other conference calls that are U.S. based, they might prioritize the U.S. ones. Getting your research out will be more difficult. So having experienced broker dealers in the U.S. that are experts, whether in shipping, technology, or energy, trusted investment bankers that have good relationships with investors are going to be key to getting those ideas out to those investors. So it's difficult, but it's definitely not impossible, and it's the opportunity really is exciting. And like Joe's saying, OTC is a very inexpensive product in the sense that risk reward is in your favor, especially if you work hard, have a lot of conversations, be patient, be consistent, delivering on your goals. And just realizing it's pretty much the same thing, but at the same time, they're going to just have less of a patience level in the sense of what they're going to be willing to invest in because it's not locally.
That's great. And Thomas, the UA, have a unique perspective here too.
No, but I feel a little bit more that here is growth more important than back home. That's maybe the main thing. If you go here and say, yeah, what's your target? I don't have a target. That doesn't work. But back home, it might do that because they look at the historical numbers. Here, you need to have a long plan. You need to have pretty high expectation of what you're going to do. Because if I don't believe my business, why should them? Right. So that's like more important, I would say.
I also like to just add to that. I think be bold, right? Like, don't be afraid to tell your story when any win should be treated as a big win. So whether you sign up a small customer or a large customer, right? Like there's a story to be told around that. And I think just constant communication to the market and, regular updates about your execution on the business plan, these are all things that U.S. investors want to hear and want to feel engaged. And, the ability to tell your story effectively certainly matters.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that a lot of Nordic companies would prefer to maybe just let the numbers speak for themselves, but you can't really do that in the US. You have to be proactive and sort of, as Joe said, put news out there for every deal with customer.
What do you see when you're dealing with your clients or your investments as some of the biggest challenges that they're facing when they're looking to come and talk to U.S. investors?
Want to go?
You could go.
I think the biggest challenge really is they really want to it's just fighting for relevance. So sometimes you don't necessarily need to rely on the banker to make these phone calls to investors. So just be willing to pick up the phone. If there's a really attractive investor in your peer that's very similar to you and similar risk reward profile, same industry, call that investor yourself. Let them be aware of the opportunity that you have. Provide some links to the videos on your website and strike a meeting. There's nothing stopping a company from making a phone call. Of course, though, engaging the best investment bankers in that local region and the sector expertise is going to also make that easier. Be bold and don't be afraid to pick up the phone. I think that U.S. persons are very open to new relationships.
I forget who mentioned it, but they talked about kind of being here in New York and sort of the energy and, the desire to grow. While focusing on the macro is certainly important and kind of the general economic environment, geopolitical stuff, all of that should be taken into consideration. But knowing that a strategy in the U.S. is a long-term strategy, right? Like not getting afraid of, whether it's tariffs or a new administration or wars around the world, all things that, are outside of our control and things that are certainly not welcome. But just, have the ability to zoom out and remember that this is a long-term strategy. Your business is for the long term. And those things that are outside of your control, shouldn't influence or play a factor in the day-to-day as much as or as scary as it may seem.
That's good. Maybe talk about some of the emerging trends in the capital markets for the Nordic companies are looking at and what the U.S. investors are focusing on when they're looking and talking to some of the Nordic companies that you understand.
Sweden is a great example. Jason mentioned it this morning in his opening remarks. It's one of the best IPO destinations on the planet right now. So I think, the Nordics as a whole, the region has perhaps been, maybe underserved from a global perspective. And that's, wrong in my opinion. Long-time leaders in traditional industries like oil and gas or fisheries or different sort of legacy type businesses. But most recently, like you can see in the diversity of the companies that are presenting here today, right? Like green technology, digital assets, startup aviation, right? These are all fantastic new sectors that are certainly relevant to the U.S. investor, and coupled with the different things that we've talked about in terms of strategy today, we're excited to help bring those companies to the market.
I think in general, Nordic companies have a lot of, there's a lot to them that is attractive to U.S. investors. There's sort of a great engineering background. There are these new fields like sustainability, clean tech, fintech, health tech that are all, you have a lot of active companies in that sector in the Nordics. Then just sort of like corporate culture in the Nordics, corporate governance, all of these are at an extremely high level at the Nordics, where U.S. investors, they can't really find a better destination than the Nordics.
Do you find U.S. investors value that?
It would depend on the investor, but yeah, I might say they undervalue it to a small.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree. Corporate governance is extremely high. And those who are not familiar, basically, if you're the largest shareholder, you are in charge of who to put on the board. It's not the CEO who's in charge of deciding the board. It's the largest shareholders. Money talks, basically, when it comes to that. If you have the most at risk, you should have a decision of who's going to be on the board. So it's a complete different approach to it. And that's something that you've seen a lot of U.S. funds now popping up, just focused on the Nordic region because they love the corporate governance. The quality of the management is fantastic. I think often in the United States, culture, it's okay to work at a company for 2-3 years and then you kind of upgrade your title or salary and you move on to another company. To me, it feels like Nordic companies is able to hold managements for much longer, and there's much more kind of a long-term vision there, and it's obviously better to have a stable management structure.